Thanks for joining us for what I hope is going to be a really fun discussion about rock novels, that magical convergence between music and literature. And we have a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to pop through introductions and maybe we can each talk just very briefly about our own rock novels before we start the conversation. Okay. So we have Claire Hopple over here. And Claire's the author of 6 books, including her novella, Tell Me How You Really Feel, and her most recent novel, Take It Personally, which just came out not very long ago. Yeah. Published by Stalking Horse Press earlier this year. She's the fiction editor at X-Ray. Her stories have appeared in Wrigley, Southwest Review, Forever Mag, Cleveland Review of Books, and others. She is a Pennsylvania native living in Asheville. Find out more about Claire at clairehopple.com. You want to talk just a minute about your book?
Yes. So in Take It Personally, it's about the lead singer of a local rock band who also takes on a private investigator position. She's very new at it, so she's totally an amateur. So it leads through that, and then the band ends up going on tour halfway through the book, and she has to kind of drop her project and then come back to it. So yeah, that's kind of the basics.
She has a great voice. You should read it. And Michael Amos Cody. Michael was born in the South Carolina Low Country and raised in the North Carolina Highlands. Michael spent his 20s writing songs in Nashville and his 30s in school. He's the author of the novel Gabriel's Songbook, A Twilight Reel Stories, and the forthcoming novel from Madville Publishing, Streets of Nashville. He lives in East Tennessee and teaches lit at East Tennessee State University. Michael also taught an honor special topics course on rock novels last year, so he's a great person to be here talking about rock novels in general. So, Michael, tell us a few words about Streets of Nashville.
All right, Streets of Nashville is I thought it was a suspense novel, that's what I called it. But when some of the reviews started coming back in, they were calling it a thriller, so I guess I'll take that. But Streets of Nashville is a story about a guy who's a songwriter. He's about 30 years old, and he's been in Nashville for 5 years. He's just getting his first taste of success. People are starting to be interested in his songs. And right when that happens, he's out celebrating. He's a little bit drunk. He's walking on Music Row late at night, and he witnesses a murder. And so the rest of the novel is sort of this cat and mouse game between Ezra, who just wants to write his songs and make his living, right? Try to make his way, but he now has this killer who knows that he's a witness. And so the killer develops a kind of obsession with him. And so Ezra's cleaning pools, he's writing songs, and he's dumping this killer and trying to figure out how to survive.
So Michael's over at the Madville table, so snag a copy of the book before you leave. And I'm Christy Alexander Hallberg. I've been teaching at East Carolina University for way too long. And I'm Senior Associate Editor of North Carolina Literary Review and creator, host, producer, what have you, at Rock is Lit, which is a podcast devoted to rock novels. I'm also the author of Searching for Jimmy Page. And Searching for Jimmy Page follows 18-year-old Luna Kane as she journeys from her family's farm in eastern North Carolina to England to solve a mystery her deceased free-spirited mother set in motion when she was a child, which is Jimmy Page her father? And if you don't know who Jimmy Page is, he was the founder and guitarist of the group Led Zeppelin. And if you don't know who Led Zeppelin is, I can't help you. And at its heart, it's a story about grief. It's a story about obsession. It's, I think, a story about how we use art and myth to create our own personal narratives, and also the religiosity of music, how we make gods of some of the musicians whose music resonates with us for whatever reason. So this is the panel, and I figured the best way to start a conversation about rock novels is to talk about what makes a good rock novel. So I'll hand that off to the two of you first.
Okay, all right. um, my favorite rock novels are not necessarily the ones that follow a musician per se, but the rock is just the music is something that is just in the air around the characters and the action. One of my favorites that I used in the course was an Edgar Award winner a couple of years ago by a Scottish author named Alan Parks called Bobby March Will Live Forever. And it was a novel in which, you got this sort of gritty Glasgow detective um, trying to solve two or three different cases at once, one of which is the death of a rock star that he created who was sort of in this. He had auditioned for the Stones, right? And the Stones offered him a job, and he turned it down because he wanted to be his own thing. Anyway, so Bobby March ends up dead. But the novel is, so it's got that music, but then just always something playing on the radio. He's out at a club, seeing a band while he's looking for a suspect and that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily a musician that's the focus, but just a person whose music is just in his life all the time. So that was one of my favorites.
Completely agree. It's a vibe. It has to be a vibe that's a part of the novel and the atmosphere, and less about the technicality of music itself.
Yeah, I'm reminded of this great article in Electric Lit that Jeff Jackson wrote some years ago. And Jeff wrote the novel Destroy All Monsters, the last rock novel, and the novella Miracopora, which is also music-centric.
He's such a good writer.
Yes, he is such a good writer. But just to make sure I get this right, I wanted to quote him here. But one of the things he said about what makes a good rock novel is that it should capture the immediacy, mystery, and raw power of the best rock music. And I can't really think of a better way to say that. I mean, there's that immediacy from the music that needs to show up there. And there's that, some of the best rock novels, I think, are more about the fans than the musicians. And in that sense, it's about obsession. And you mentioned one rock novel. Claire, can you think of some others that immediately come to mind that, really exemplify what's best about that genre?
I can't think of anything. I'm sure I'll think of something in like 10 minutes, but.
Well, the elephant in the room, of course, is Taylor Jenkins Reid's, Daisy Jones and the Six. Everybody kind of knows that, and it's like the poster child of rock novels right now. But there's so many amazing books, like Jennifer Egan's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, A Visit from the Goon Squad, and Dana Spiotta, Eat the Document, which was a National Book Award nominated book. Zachary Lazar's Sway. I mean, there's a whole world of these kinds of novels out there that I really wasn't even aware of until just a few years ago.
And if I can just tag that for a moment, Christy is the creator and producer of a fantastic podcast called Rock Lit that you should go pull up and listen to, where she's done 3 or 4 seasons now of these novels that are rock novels, music novels. It's really, really terrific. So there are lots of things that Claire and I can't think of right now, but they're out there.
All of our guests. Yeah.
I was thinking of one of my favorites from the class was another one was Sarah Pinsker's Song for a New Day.
Yeah.
Which is a really, really cool novel. So it features a female singer-songwriter, kind of alternative singer-songwriter who's just having her first hit, and this really strange thing happens and the world shuts down. Well, I mean, she wrote this it published less than a year before COVID.
She is responsible for COVID.
So, and then, and there are no live venues. So there are underground live venues people playing in barns and playing in these, nondescript clubs in the inner city, and sort of hiding out. It was a pandemic element to it, but there was also terrorism, and you get a sense that it's kind of a biological or chemical thing that is happening to some extent, but it's her main character is so driven by the music, right? But it's in a world where people are not allowed to get together. It's really, really cool, called Song for a New Day.
And to expand it further, I mean, this novel that I'm thinking of right now, it doesn't actually have a musician in it, but it's very much about music itself. It's called Till the Wheels Fall Off by Brad Zeller. It's a Coffeehouse Press book, I believe. And it's set in a skating rink that's dying, and it's just all about the playlists and what they skate to and how music keeps them alive. It's really good. Let's check it out.
Well, thanks for those comments about Rock is Lit, and I should say these two have been on Rock is Lit, so they're fabulous books, and we've covered that. Or actually, Claire was on talking about kind of this very thing in an episode about music and fiction. There are a lot of critics who give the genre kind of a bad rap. And I think it's because it's so easy to resort to stereotype and cliches when you're writing about rock stars. So I wanted to talk about some of the challenges, difficulties in writing about music and musicians in fiction. Michael is a musician and a writer. So I'm really curious what you think about this, especially in terms of the difficulties of describing music in fiction.
Yeah, the difficult thing, but the fun thing is to try to get this sort of oral thing into words, right? To describe a performance on stage or the process of writing a song. If you're a person, I mean, that's what I do and I have done, right? So to me, I don't know that it has the mystery, or that I recognize the mystery in it, being able to do that. But the fun thing is trying to communicate the energy of that, through the words, and to avoid the cliches, right? But how does a song develop in a songwriter's head and in the songwriter's life? And how does it feel to be on stage, right? I mean, all of us, to some extent, know what it's like to be sitting and watching that, but how does it feel to be on stage and doing this thing for those people and getting the energy back and all of that? But it's so fun to try to figure out how to describe what the bass is doing or what the keyboard is doing, how the people are responding, that only the person up here sees what everybody's doing. So it takes some time, but it's really rewarding when you can come up with this scene that is just musical.
And I think there's a lot that you can do with scenes that aren't musical that also are telling of maybe what the music is like. So the musician's personalities or the reactions that the crowd might have to their music can go a long way.
Describing the music.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think this harkens right back to talking about so many books being about fans and not just the musicians. Because if you're talking about describing the music from the fans' perspective, not only do you get the essence of what the music is that's in the scene, but you get the sense of what it means to this character. And you find out a lot about people when you ask them what kind of music they listen to. It really reveals a lot about them as people, and it's the same with characters. So in my book, I'm obviously writing about a real musician. The two of you are writing about fictional musicians. Talk to me a little bit about what the challenges are in creating this completely original, fictitious musician as opposed to just writing about somebody that the world already knows. I mean, Claire, what was your strategy for creating these musicians?
I think I tried to let their actions speak for their music themselves, like what they would do on tour. They have a limo that they're riding around in that someone found under a bridge. So these characters are very zany. A lot of people who read my work say that it's absurdist, but I think that the only way to truly describe the experience of reality is to be absurdist, because it expresses the emotions that we all feel on the level that at least I feel them. So anyway, so I think yeah, just getting into the minds of each of the people and who they are as people can say a lot about the band when they form.
I think musicians, performers are so drenched in cliche, right? Whether it's their arrogance or whether it's their vulnerabilities and their insecurities, their drug habit, whatever else might be. I mean, all of those things can so easily become cliche. And to create a musician that um, is just a real person who loves to write music, I mean, most of us are fans, and a lot of times that's why we create, because something that was created that we heard moved us in a way that we want to do that, right? And so I think the fan thing works kind of both ways for musicians, because I'm fans of this and that, and if I can create something that gives the feeling that I got from this other thing, right? And that's and so to dig into that in fiction and creating character and action, I think is that's how I like.
Well, the difficulties for me in writing about a real musician are sort of, kind of obvious. I mean, people know Led Zeppelin's music, or the fans that are people that are fans of them know Led Zeppelin's music. They know the mystique, and so trying to create that in some way in fiction was my challenge. And then just in general, writing about a real musician, you got to keep in mind that people can fact check. So if you've got them going off to America on tour in 1973 and they weren't on tour in America in 1973, fans will let you know that. Like, you screwed up. So being mindful, doing a lot of research in those cases was important to me. Another thing, I remember when the book was about to come out and I was looking for people to review it, and this guy from Mojo magazine got in touch with me. He'd seen something, maybe a post of mine. I don't know. Anyway, he got in touch with me and said, I'm interested in reading this and possibly reviewing it for Mojo. So, I got really excited and had the publisher send him a book over in England, thinking, oh, a review in Mojo. And then he writes back, I can't touch this because he said, I kind of know Robert and Jimmy and the band a little bit, and because you're touching on some things that they might consider a little controversial, I'm gonna just pass on reviewing it. So you run into things like that. Super groupie Pamela Day Barr, who had a liaison with Jimmy Page in the late 60s, very early 70s. I contacted her for a blurb, and I totally forgot. There's this one sentence or two where the main character refers to her in a less than positive way. I kind of forgot about that. To her credit, she did the blurb anyway, but it was a very short blurb. So I don't know if she maybe just read part of it or if she read that part and thought, anyway, you
But
run
she
into
came-
stuff like that.
She came on your show.
She did. She came on the show. So, kudos, Pamela. She got over it. The only other thing that I wanted to touch on with regard to challenges with writing about music has to do with song lyrics. And I don't think that you used any. Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah, and Michael's, of course, were original to him, and he's a songwriter, so a big part of Streets in Nashville. And this is one of the things I really liked about it. It had a lot to do with the main character Ezra's songwriting process and how he could just be walking along and something strike him in his mind, he's writing lyrics. But what were some challenges for you with song lyrics?
I think setting this scene around the making of the lyrics. Right? So Ezra can't just sort of suddenly sit down and lyric spills out. Right? So there are you put him in these moments where something strikes him and he remembers an idea, and then later sit him down, have him writing a verse.
Yeah.
And it's not how to sort of pace it through the songs that he writes, right? How to doesn't write the whole thing in one chapter, right? So one of the songs shows up over several chapters, the course of a week, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So just how to set it in the story and not have it be okay. Here's a song and then back to the story.
Yeah. In my case, the challenge would be what can you quote and not have to pay a royalty or something? So that was really difficult. Initially, Initially, I had a lot of song lyrics, and I tried to get permission from Led Zeppelin's publisher, and they weren't going to do it. So, sorry, you hear now? They weren't going to do it, so I had to take them all out. And what you wound up doing is getting to the essence of the lyrics and using the imagery and focusing on that as opposed to the actual lyrics. Sorry.
I can ask Michael something. That's okay.
Go for it, yeah.
I'm just curious, as a musician. Oh, Kristen, your friend has that copy.
You have a candy over there.
As a musician, do you feel like the songwriter in your book wrote the same way you might write a song in real life, where the lyrics slowly come to them, like over time, when certain experiences happen, and all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's he works the way I work, in that I kept a notebook with me all the time, and so does Ezra, and he'll sit down and just sort of lose. The time will just go away as he's working through variations of lines and verses, and that's the way it always was for me, and I liked that, so I kept that in the book. I mean, a lot of Nashville writers. Ezra is a Nashville writer, but a lot of Nashville writers, they go to work like 9 to 5. And they sit in the room, usually 2 or 3 of them together, and they'll hammer out a song a day. Right? And I was never that kind of writer. Ezra's not that kind of writer. So it just comes to him. He has this experience, that gives him something, and then he has this experience, and that gives him a little something, and he figures out how to put those two together. So, yeah, it's a piecemeal thing that comes, and he does for his living what I did for a while, which is clean swimming pools, which is a very sort of um, Zen activity. To be walking around a pool in the summer, and cleaning, you're checking the baskets, and all of the filters and those kinds of things. It was just a very quiet, easy to think job.
Yeah, it's a much more natural way to come up with an actual song versus the musicians I know and songwriters I know where they're just like stuck in a room with one or two people and it's just some awkward connection that they made and they have to figure out how to work together and all that dynamic just can get really weird really quickly.
And the fiction for me is the same. I mean, I try to write regularly, but I don't plan anything. I just sit down and see what happens. The songwriting.
Do you guys see some trends in the rock novel genre these days? Anything popping out that maybe is a little unusual or gaining popularity? Or what are your thoughts on trends?
I see a trend in the overall fiction market that has to deal with musicians. I'm seeing a lot of famous rock stars publish their own auto fiction. So it's like kind of their life story, but they label it as a novel so they can take artistic license and make it into something else. I'm thinking of Jeff Rickley from Thursday. He just came out with a book like last year. It's a really great book, actually. From Rose Books, which is a brand new press run by Chelsea Hodson. And just the trend of autofiction in general, but also another publisher, I believe, Little Engines. They were just in a major music publication. They got a story on bringing in Justin Vernon from Bon Iver. He got like a couple of poems in one of the magazines. So I think what struggling or brand new indie publishers are doing in the lit space is drawing these bigger music names and getting them on board so that they can publish what they want to publish and who they want to publish and everything like that, because they actually have some money behind it, which is for people, for more normal people like us, that's really exciting to see. Yeah.
Susanna Hoffs from the Bengals published a rock novel last year. I think it's called This Bird Has Flown. Susie Quattro, I don't know if some of y'all remember her. Yeah, you're shaking your head.
Yes.
But Susie Quattro wrote a rock novel called The Hurricane. She was on Rock is Lit to talk about that. But definitely, I agree with you. That is a big trend. Having a lot of rock stars venture over into fiction. You mentioned, Michael, Sarah Pinsker and her novel. And that's a sci-fi rock novel. I'm also seeing a lot of horror rock novels. People like Stacey Lane Wilson. She's got a whole series of vampire rock novels. I think her vampire is, wasn't Anne Rice's, wasn't he a rock star in one of those books?
I never got past the first one.
I neither.
I did like it, but I didn't read it anymore.
Okay. I think in one of them he was, but anyway, Stacey Lane Wilson has a whole series of this vampire who's a rock star. So there's that, and there's actually this really interesting sub-genre that focuses on the Manson murders. And that's always kind of been my jam, so I like those books. But you've got people like Zachary Lazar, who wrote the novel Sway, and that has to do with some of the characters in the book are members of the Manson family, including Charlie Manson. And I was so impressed with how he handled that because everybody has seen clips of Charles Manson being interviewed and how wacky he was. So he really captured the cadence of his voice and mannerisms and whatnot. Emma Klein, who wrote the book The Girls, and that has a little bit to do with in a fictional way, some of the women in the Manson family. So there are all these little niches coming up that focus on music, that where music is a central element in plot or characterization. There's a whole group of people writing 90s nostalgia rock novels. What I'd like to see more of that I haven't seen a lot of is more people of color writing, and I use the term rock novel kind of as an umbrella term. It's like any kind of music-centric fiction is really what I'm referring to. Chris L. Terry was on Rock is Lit, and he wrote a wonderful punk rock novel, and he's biracial. I'd love to see more of those voices represented in the genre.
Absolutely, the whole publishing industry in general needs
Yeah.
to work on that.
Absolutely.
Across the board. It's just pitiful.
Yeah.
The Spokane writer Sherman Alexie has a couple of novels that one called Reservation Blues,
Mm-hmm.
about three young reservation indigenous guys who want to have a band, and they discover this magical guitar. It offers them the potential to break out of the reservation. It's a really good. It's older. It's probably.
I'm curious, what was it about yourselves and your own history and your own proclivities that draws you to that genre? Because, Michael, I know that that's mainly the kind of things that you're writing in fiction, and both of the books that I've read of yours have a lot of that in it, Claire. So what is it about your own history, your own taste, your own proclivities that draw you to that?
Well, I grew up in a really musical or half musical household. My mother played the piano. All of her brothers played instruments. There would be family reunions. There were like 11 of those kids. So there, family reunions where the porch is just full of music, musicians, um, regular church, high school rock band, all of those sorts of things. I've just always been around. And I was just always drawn to it. But I was particularly drawn to story songs. We were talking about the playlist that's been playing today, mercifully good. Um, and and a couple of the surprises for me was hearing a couple of old Glenn Campbell,
Yes.
Wichita Lineman, and those. I remember as a kid, I don't know how old I was, maybe 10, taking laundry baskets and pencils, making a drum set, and playing along with Glenn Campbell's greatest hits. It was just that songwriting, and then of course, once I started branching out of that, it was always song stories that got me, like the classic one-hit wonder, "Brandy, You're a Fine Girl." So,
Looking Glass.
wonderful story song. One of my favorites is the British Al Stewart, "Year of the
With the
Cat."
cat, yeah.
And then, of course, I'm a big Springsteen fan, and all those were stories. So I think that element of story and music together got me. In fact, the first two stories that I published, short stories that I published, were songs that I had written that I took and just expanded into a 5,000 word short story.
And Claire, I said that both of your books, you've written 6. I'm thinking about Take It Personally and Tell Me How You Really Feel in terms of music popping up in there.
For me, I just recognize the power in music. I'm not a musician. I had to play the recorder in grade school, and it was miserable for me. I was more of a dancer, but I am an appreciator of music, and there's so much power there that you can't really get from anything else. But I also think we always hear write what you know, and as writers, we don't necessarily want to write about writers. That's been done a lot. And so to write about musicians as a way to capture that creative process and some of your line of thinking and your emotions, but channeling it into something adjacent to it, still very much a creative project in and of itself. And particularly with Take It Personally, it was more of a vehicle, a catalyst for the plot to get her out of the situation that she's in, give her some perspective on it, and then be thrown right back into it.
And for me, it was just a no-brainer. I came out of the womb a music fan. That was the first art form that grabbed me, long before literature. And when I discovered Led Zeppelin at 15, I mean, I was ripe for the picking. I was this kid who didn't feel comfortable in her own skin or that she fit in. And then there's this band with all of this mythology around it and all of this sort of danger and, you know, all that occult stuff that went along with that band's reputation. And it just lent itself well to expanding those concepts, those images into a narrative. So that's really what drew me to writing about music and literature. I mean, putting them together, rather.
And Michael, like you were saying, there's a lot of, I was just talking to my boss about this yesterday. He called it like literary lyrics.
Yeah.
There are a lot of musicians writing these incredible songs, and they've probably inspired us to write novels or stories or poems or what have you. Because I think of Ben Gibbard. I mean, when I was in college, Death Cab for Cutie changed my life. I heard Expo 86 and I thought, he's writing about a slide, but he's not saying the word slide, and I feel like I'm on the slide. How is he doing this? It's just incredible. So it's easy to be inspired by really good lyrics too.
Yeah. And don't you feel like that you've read a story when you've listened to a lot of Bob Dylan songs, going back to that, and Joni Mitchell songs? And there's so much poetry and narrative and imagery in some of the best rock lyrics that it just sort of translates into a fictional setting and translates to that medium.
You got somebody writing a 40-word verse
Yep.
for a song.
Yeah.
And it's a whole story, packed with emotion, right in those 40 words.
Yeah.
4 lines of lyrics. And that was one thing that I wanted to emulate as a songwriter, and I think what I learned in doing that as a songwriter has significantly influenced the way my prose.
If there was one rock novel that you would tell the folks here to go check out to kind of be the gateway drug, what would it be?
I've never read Daisy Jones.
Well, full confession, I haven't.
Yeah, me neither. I haven't read most bestsellers of any kind because they're usually not my kind of thing. But yeah, I mentioned Jeff Wrigley's Someone Who Isn't Me. I think it's a really powerful story. He's great at writing. He's been a lifelong reader, and you can tell by how he writes. And it's about addiction and his own personal struggle with that, which I think even if you're not literally addicted to something, you can relate to that on some level. So I'll love that one for sure.
There's a really old novel. I mean, the first rock novel that I read, I think this author is now canceled for bad behavior. So I won't say his name, but
I think Sherman Alexie was canceled too.
yeah,
Right?
Sherman. I already broke through that tonight.
Yes.
Yeah, Sherman.
The landmine these days.
And I never heard. I just mentioned this to someone recently. I said, "Ooh, he's a bad man." Dead, but Jerzy Kosinski, the author, but he wrote a novel. I think it was different from a lot of stuff that he did, but it's called Pinball, and it's this wonderful novel about a a rock star that nobody knows his real identity. Just goes by one name, Goddard, and the record companies basically just receive his recordings, put them out, and I'll do the spoiler alert. He's the son of a guy who owns a man who owns a declining classical music label. So Goddard gives his music to the record company, the parent company, in order to financially support his father's failing label. Right? But then of course there are people who become obsessed with trying to find out who Goddard is, and he has indiscretion and such. But it was just a great novel. It was the first one that I read that had music in it the way that I thought about it.
I usually say Sway by Zachary Lazar, but since I've already talked about that, I'm actually going to suggest Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And you don't think of that as a rock novel, but the music, the jazz, the bebop is so infused in that narrative. It really informs you about South Paradise, the main character. It really tells you who he is, and it's flowing through the words. The style that Kerouac uses is so like the rhythm of jazz that, to me, it's like the first rock novel.
That's a great point.
So that would be my suggestion. And we have about 15 more minutes, and my voice is giving out. So yes.
Yeah, this is all new to me. This genre. When I think of like rock writing or rock lit, I think of something like Almost Famous. I think of movies. Movies come to mind, and more than like American Graffiti, where music sets setting and the whole vibe of the story. But with something like Jimmy Page and mixing fact with fiction, that would seem very difficult to get published.
It wasn't easy.
Yeah, and how does something like that different than say, again, I'm sorry, a movie about Elvis by Baz Luhrmann, or Elvis as a detective by Netflix,
Well, they're just different stories. I mean, the Cameron Crowe, and I like Cameron Crowe's work very much. I think he did actually take that screenplay for Almost Famous. He may have done it for Fast Times at Ridgemont High too, and turned it into a novel.
Okay.
So just same story, just with some tweaks and different medium, different genre.
Yeah.
So in terms of it being difficult to get a book published about a real rock star,
Yeah.
you walk a fine line.
Yeah.
You don't want to write anything that's going to get you sued. But there's a lot about celebrities that are in the public domain. So I don't think I was disrespectful in any way, and I don't know how I could be, because I'm such a slobbering fan when it comes to him in particular and to that band. But it was just, I think he was less a part of the story and more a vehicle to get to who Luna's mother was, and a vehicle to get to how Luna and her mother used myth and art to kind of recreate their whole identity.
I see.
So it was less. There's one scene where Jimmy Page himself appears in, but he's from afar. It's just he's in the room.
So it's not really biography. It's not
no.
biography.
Well, no,
It is.
It's not.
Okay.
But there
Whereas
are factual elements.
where you would have something like an Elvis Lerman and a Bob Dylan by Chalamet or something
Right.
like that's supposedly biography, though you would have a lot of people argue that.
Yeah, no, there aren't any scenes where I've recreated Jimmy Page at Kezar Stadium in 1973 talking backstage to somebody.
Okay.
There's nothing like that.
Okay. All right.
But you should come clean.
Oh, no.
Because in the scene that Jimmy Page is in the room, you were in the room as well.
This is true. If we want to talk biography, we can talk mine. But yeah, I was in the room with Jimmy Page in that same location that the scene in the book is set in, and I did chase him down the hall. And that's as far as I will go. Thank you for outing me.
Hey.
I just wanted you to notice such verisimilitude here.
Oh,
It's so truthful.
Hey. Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions? Yep.
So you are taking music and bringing it into the novel form. Do any of you have like songs or songwriters that you know or that you particularly like that bring novels or written works, book works into music, sort of in the other direction?
It's an interesting question.
I have known that, but I have forgotten. I did one thing that I was always so moved by. I read it every year. The long story from James Joyce called "Dead," and I wrote a song that I wanted to capture that, and it's called "Michael Fury is Dead." It just tries to capture that last 3 or 4 pages of Dead when Gabriel and Greta are in the hotel at the end of Joyce's. And it was an interesting exercise. I think the song's pretty good too, but it was an interesting exercise trying to pull out the emotion and the beauty of the language from Joyce and put it into a song. I know that there are examples of what you're talking about, but
But I think you make a good point. It doesn't really flow as much the other direction because
Right.
musicians are sexy and like us writers are just kind of hanging out with regular people. But also people don't really read as much as they listen to music, so it's unequal. But I'd love to see more of that happen for sure. It does seem like movies often are based on novels or stories, and you see that a good bit. But you don't really see that as much. At least I don't in music.
Why do I keep flashing on the Kate Bush song "Wuthering Heights"?
There you go.
I mean, yeah, but I can't think now what the lyrics are for that, so I don't know if it
it
relates
does
to the
say
novel.
Heathcliff.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. There you go.
She does say Heathcliff.
Okay.
So
Any
there you
other
go.
questions? Well, this has been a blast. Thank you all for coming to the panel. Thank you, Claire and Michael. And thank you all the folks at Knoxville Book Festival for making this happen. If any of you are writers and you write music-infused short fiction, Raucous Lit is sponsoring a contest for rock stories called the Bill Hallberg Rock and Roll Short Story Contest. And if you're interested, pop over to my table and pick up a pamphlet. Entries are due by August the 1st, yeah. So thank you.
And I have one copy of my book that I brought in case we did a reading. And I will give it to somebody if you give me a Goodreads review. It's free.
There you
Just
go. That's a
review
good
it.
deal.
That's all. I'm going to leave it on this coffee table.
No, you won't. That's one slick table. Well polished.